All right, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all this morning. Guys, feel free to squeeze in close, stay warm this morning. It's chilly out there today. Thanks for being back here. This is week 5 of our Kids in Tech class. Let me just remind you of a few things before we get into our topic for today. As far as our schedule goes, you can see that on the very first page that you have there. So next week, Josh will be talking a very sensitive topic. We'll be talking about pornography. So just so you can plan according for that. And then we'll be talking about gaming. And then with that, just the addiction that's possible with all of these topics we've been talking about. Not just to gaming, but that is a part of it. And then we'll take a look at some tech tips and alternatives. And so the goal for that week, you'll get to hear from a few different people. Just kind of how to begin the parental control thing. So we'll just have a short demonstration on that from a couple of guys. And then we'll just talk about just some other things that you can be doing as a family to replace technology in the home so that you're not always glued to your screen, glued to the TV, whatever it might be. Just some things to spark some ideas. The week after that, we'll be covering just a big list of resources. So we'll look at books that we think will be helpful, especially some that we've been reading to do all the research for these lessons. We'll be looking at some third-party software for parents that can help you monitor and just another layer of parental controls to technology in your home. We'll be looking at other organizations that help parents with this very thing. We'll talk about that. And just a bunch of different stuff that we'll just be throwing out there at you to help with those. So that's going to be a lot of info coming at you, so just so you can plan for that. And then we have our Q&A will be our very last week. And so I already saw that some of you put some questions out there in the box. If you think of something, anything while we're talking, jot it down on one of those Q&A cards. If there's something that we haven't discussed that you're curious about, just jot it down on one of those Q&A cards. We'll take that last week to answer those as best we can. And then depending on how many of those cards we have, we may just open it up for a little discussion that week, that last week. Okay, and so that's what you can expect in the weeks to come. And let me just remind you again of our Facebook group. And so you can join that. We've been posting some resources there. So Josh talked about a video on the TikTok algorithm last week. He shared that on the page. We share the videos to these if you're not able to be here. We're a little behind on the last couple of weeks. We had some issues with our live stream, so they weren't just readily available like they would normally be. So, but those will be coming up, and we'll continue to share resources, videos, articles, whatever on that Facebook group. It's a great way for you if you guys have questions after this. So the goal is to keep it going so that we can just kind of stay in touch, because this topic will always be evolving as new technology, new apps come out, all that. And so that'll just be a way for us to stay connected in a very informal way moving forward. So if you haven't joined that yet, make sure you join that, okay? All right, so our topic for today, everybody got your notes there. We're looking at TV and movies. And really, TV is not what it used to be, right? And so now many of you probably still have a television in your home. We do, and in fact, it's probably even like the center of your living space. Typically, it's all the furniture is arranged so that everybody has a good view of what's on the TV screen, right? That's how our house is set up. We don't have like a beautiful fireplace or anything, and as much as we would love for our family to be people who just sit around the fireplace and read, it's like the idea sounds good to me. It's just like the actual doing it part is, it's not as fun as TV, and or easy as TV, and we'll see why that is, right? But television, when it came out like in the 50s, it quickly became the center of the home, right? And so everybody would gather around, view the TV, and so it's really been a big part of our lives. But it has been changing us. It changes the family dynamic for sure, and even the way that our kids watch TV today. And when I say TV, I mean the media, the shows, all that kind of thing. because I'm sure you're not surprised to find out that most teens don't watch TV on a television set. They watch it on their mobile device, on their phone, right? And so it's changed over the years. It does have this, excuse me, it does have this allure to us as parents, because, you know, we want to keep our kids quiet. We want to keep them occupied. We want to keep them away from us for, you know, a set amount of time. We go and turn the TV on, right? We let them watch some TV. And, you know, a little TV isn't bad, but we do have to be careful with that. And it is a bit of a double-edged sword because while we want to keep our kids occupied and we like the results that we get from that, you know, just a break, I guess, sometimes, there is some guilt that comes with us plopping them in front of the television set, right? And so, you know, these TV creators, these show creators, marketers, they've done their job to help us feel a little less guilty about that by providing, and I put this in air quotes, educational television, right? And so, you know, there's plenty of stuff out there that claims to be educational television, and whether it truly is or not is up for debate. Just because something, you know, claims to be educational and holds your kid's attention doesn't necessarily mean it's beneficial for your kid, and we'll see why that is. But just to keep this in mind, the American Academy of Pediatrics warns that children should not watch television before the age of 2. Right? So no exposure to screens before the age of 2 at all. Those studies have linked early viewing with an increased risk of attention deficit disorder, autism, aggression, obesity, and possibly dyslexia, right? So we're, according to the Academy of Pediatrics, we're not supposed to put anyone as young as 2 in front of a television set, because if you remember from several weeks ago, we saw how technology is shaping our kids and what it does to their brains, right? You guys remember that? We talked about neural pathways and how certain things strengthen certain neural pathways, and the things that, the neural pathways that technology strengthens, remember those branches of a tree, are usually opposed to the ones that are required for patience and reading and focus and those types of things, all right? So our kids are very impressionable, and they're very susceptible to the effects of television. And then what happens is those branches that you use less often, like the ones required for focus and patience and reading and etc., a thing called neural pruning takes place, right? And the brain cuts those to kind of get rid of the dead branches so that the other ones can grow stronger, and that's really just not helping our kids at all, okay? And so it can be a touchy topic, this thing of television, because of its place in the home, its central place in the home. But then we need to look at the effects of television, and we need to be able to look at what's really behind all these television shows that are coming out, okay? But first, let's just take a look at the sheer volume of television today. So back in the 1950s, when television was first released, there was a handful of shows that people could watch, right? You were kind of limited. But now, you can see over the years how many TV shows have been released, and I don't know if you can tell on that chart, but it's up over 10,000 with a slight decline in the last several years, right? So not only are we drawn to television, but the amount of this is just TV shows. This isn't even movies. This is just TV shows. The amount that's available to us and our kids is just astounding. It would take lifetimes to be able to view everything that's available out there. And so you know there's every kind of choice that you can imagine out there, which just plays into kind of that instant age that we talked about, and the entitlement, right? So I mean, you can't just sit there and everybody watches the same thing, because, you know, one, there's not even a remote and nobody wants to get up and change the dial, you know, physically back in 1950. But now everything out there you can imagine, you can watch it on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, your TV, whatever you want. So you know, it no longer even brings families together like the way that it used to, right? So there's this incredible amount of television available. And then we would be remiss to not talk about the cable versus streaming side of television. So how many of you still pay for regular basic television pumped in through your house? Wow, like 4 of you. All right, that's awesome. So it's awesome because these statistics back in 2019, they've only become, the difference has only become greater over the last couple of years. And that's in 2019, more Americans subscribed to streaming services, 69%, than traditional cable or satellite TV at 65%. Okay? So they finally crossed the line of how many cable subscribers and streaming subscribers there are out there in the U.S. And again, from who raised their hand here, those percentages are even vastly different than back then. All right, so we've cut ties to cable in our home, mainly because I just got annoyed with them. Like, they jumped the price one month, and then the very next month they jumped it again, and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna cancel you. I was just mad at them, really, more than anything. It's not that I didn't watch cable or anything. It was just spiteful, I guess, to Time Warner. No relation, by the way. Right, so cable versus streaming is a big deal. And so let's look at all the different services that are available. So in addition to cable television, there is a growing number of streaming services available in the U.S. So everyone's familiar with Netflix, right? That's kind of the quintessential streaming service. It's the main one everyone's aware of, really kind of set the precedent for the rest of them. Netflix alone has over 3,600 movies and 1,800 TV series. Again, that's not shows, that's series, and then you multiply however many shows per season, episodes per season for each of those series, right? So that's Netflix alone has that many. So then you add to that some of the popular streaming platforms: Amazon's Prime Video, Hulu, Peacock, HBO Max, YouTube TV, Showtime, Starz, Philo, Fubo TV, Epix, Tubi TV, Crackle, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, AMC Plus, Paramount Plus, Discovery Plus, ESPN Plus, plus, okay? And you can find niche services for anything that you like. So you're into anime, there's Crunchyroll and Funimation and Retro Crush. You're into horror films, there's Shudder. You're into documentaries, LGBTQ, indie films, stuff strictly from black creators. There's the weird art house flicks. There's reality TV streaming services. There's comedy. There's sports, etc. Ad infinitum, ad nauseum. Right? It just keeps going, and it never stops. Okay? And don't worry, Christians, because the marketplace hasn't left you out. They haven't forgot about you in this area. Not if they can make some money off of you. Okay? There's also faith-based streaming services like Right Now Media, Up, Faith and Family, Minnow, PureFlix, etc. There's more than that. Those are just some of the main ones. Okay? Here's the thing with all these streaming services. As of now, the FCC, so the Federal Communications Commission, has no regulation over these platforms. So they can regulate what comes across cable television. But as far as these streaming services, they have no regulation, or limited, depending on which one, right? So you ever notice anytime that like Netflix produces something, just how quickly it gets vulgar, and the language and the things that they show, right? It's almost like anything that they put out is what we would consider R-rated. It would never make the cut for cable television. But because you're paying for that, it's a private service for you, you're paying for it. The FCC has no regulation over that, so you can imagine what is just out there and available that we allow into our TV, into our homes. And it's not even like the FCC are some bastion of holiness these days. Not like they used to be, right? You guys remember? Maybe not, but back, who was it? Was it like Lucy and Ricardo? Right? They slept in separate beds. Right? But today, we're far from sleeping in separate beds now. They were a married couple that slept in separate beds on television. because of, for decency's sake, right? But now, I mean, all bets are off, even on cable television. So there's a lot out there. You guys got to be aware of that. You got to make sure you're monitoring what's coming into your homes, what your kids are watching. And just because you set one of those streaming services to a kid's account doesn't mean that they should still have free reign while watching it. Because as we'll see when we get into the content section, I'm willing to bet there's some content in those kid shows that you would not want your kids viewing. But it's still considered, kids TV. It's still targeted at, Y7 or whatever the TV rating is for young kids. Okay. Now let's look at some of the effects of television. So when it comes to our creativity and imagination, so again, this is for everybody, but keep in mind what this does to a kid's brain at such a young age, with them being so impressionable and susceptible to these effects. Okay. So television is an image-based media, right? It doesn't really work without the screen part of it. This is extremely stimulating to the brain, but not in a good way. All right, so think about this. When the mind thinks, does it think in words or does it think in images? It thinks in images, right? Like when you're reflecting on a memory, whenever you're trying to solve a problem or something you're thinking through, right? There's not like just this ticker tape of words going through your mind. Right? You think in images. And so the way our brain works, it works with images. When you read written words, your mind is liberated and your imagination is free to produce an endless array of images to accommodate what you're reading, right? You read a good book, you're picturing what's happening in your mind, your imagination is working overtime to develop the characters, the setting, all those things, to figure out what's going on. And this is true because how many of you have ever read a book and then saw a movie made about that book? Right? Almost, right? Probably all of us, unless you don't read books. You were most likely disappointed because the director's view looked nothing like the one that you created in your head. Right? So you have all this images, the way you think things should go, the way that people should look, and the director, well, he's got different images in his head of what the setting should be, what the characters should look like, how they should, behave and interact, right? So you're usually disappointed. Or how many of you have ever read a book after seeing a movie made about it? Most likely the characters and scenes you imagined looked a whole lot like the ones in the movie, right? And so, I haven't seen Dune yet, and I probably won't read Dune, the book. It's pretty thick, I think, and I just got too many other things to read. But if I were to read Dune, if I were to read Dune, I would now I already know what the characters look like. I would have all of these images in my head, and so my imagination wouldn't have to work that hard because someone's already done the work for me, right? They've already made the images, and now I'm going to view the main characters, the settings, the spaceships, all those things the same way. All right? So here's a little exercise for you. And this is given by author Shane Hipps in his book, Flickering Pixels. So read this statement on the screen. Go ahead and put that up there, okay? The boy is sad. Just think about it for a second. The boy is sad. Think about what that looks like in your head. Maybe you have a son and you picture him, crying. Maybe you have some experience where you've come across a sad boy. Maybe you work in children's ministry with us, and they drop the parent off, the parent drops the kid off, and he's not excited to be there, and so you have this image of the boy is sad. Or maybe you see a boy holding an ice cream cone and he's dropped the ice cream, and that's what I think of when I think of a sad boy, right? So however many people are in here, that's how many different images we've just come up with in our head, right? We can imagine an endless amount, and it's only limited by the amount of time that we spend thinking about this statement, the boy is sad. Okay, so now let's put an image up there. Now, everyone's image in their head is the same. Your imagination has stopped working, and this is the image you've been given, and so now when your brain thinks of the boy is sad, this is what you see, right? Your creativity, your imagination takes a break. Creativity is like a muscle. The more you work it out, the stronger it gets. In this image-driven world, our creativity and problem-solving capabilities begin to atrophy, and our brains get to the point where they crave more and more force-fed images to keep them stimulated. This is especially dangerous for our kids because exercising their creativity and imagination is a fundamental stage in brain development, and it begins at a very early age. And so again, that's part of the reason why the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screens before the age of 2. Because kids need to work their brain out. You need to read to them. They need to process these things. They need to use their imagination. That's why creative play is such a big deal for young kids, if you're aware of anything like that. All right? According to a study done by Dr. Dimitri Christakis, found that the more TV a child watches between the ages of 1 and 3, the greater the likelihood that they will develop an attention problem by age 7. The study also showed that for each hour of TV viewing in the daily average, the risk of attention problems increased by 10%. So that means if your kid watches an average of 3 hours a day, that time translates into a 30% increase in the likelihood of developing an attention problem. Which, by today's standards, 3 hours is below average for TV viewing in the home. This study was from 2004. So you can imagine the implications of today's screen and media exposure, right? Now let's look at its effects when it comes to editing. That same doctor that did and I'll share a video from this guy. He did a TED Talk that was pretty interesting that kind of combines a lot of what we've talked about. But this Dr. Christakis, he said, when you condition the mind to become accustomed to high levels of input, there's a chance that reality can just become boring, right? If you compare old TV shows with current ones, the effect becomes all too obvious. We look back at Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. There's one camera view that doesn't cut away from the time Mr. Rogers walks through the door as he puts on his cardigan and changes his shoes and introduces the topic of the show, right? There's maybe some calm music playing in the background behind Fred's soft voice as he moves through the house in his slow manner, right? He's never rushed. He's never hurried. He always has time to talk to every sock puppet he comes across, right? And then you compare that to just about any animated children's show of today. Scene cuts are fast, the music is loud, the pace frenetic, all to keep up with the attention span of your child. This is even true when we think of what are, again, educational shows for our kids. Things like Baby Einstein, right? I mean, it must be making them smarter. It's got Einstein in the name, right? But if you were to pay attention, and this is in the video that I'll share later, the scene rarely lasts for more than 4 seconds before they cut away to something else. There are discombobulated cuts between shots of animals and toys and children, and we think that we're doing our kids a service when in reality we're just feeding them nothing more than what we would call brain candy, right? There's nothing of value behind it. There's no real developmental value to these things. Just because it keeps their attention doesn't mean that it's developing them. Our kids get pulled into the glow of the screen like a moth to the flame. Their brains take a break, and our kids go catatonic. This is due in part to the way that our brains react to radiant light. It tends to shut down in response to it, and that's the type of light that's emitted from TVs. We've experienced those times when we try to get our kids' attention while they're watching TV, right? Does that ever happen? Your kid's watching TV, all right? And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, Owen. And he's focused, man. He's got focus when it comes to Paw Patrol. Wow. Right? We've all experienced that. It's like we're not there. It's like there's no one else in the room. One photographer captured these zombie-like expressions of kids as they were sucked into the glow of TV screens. This is from one photographer, right? It looks goofy, but it's sad. Creators of these children's shows have seen this effect on kids, this kind of effect where they just get drawn in, they go catatonic. And so they've had to compensate for it. Television industry has started to introduce what they call startle effects into kids' programming to snap them out of this trance so that they could pay attention again, right? Your kid gets sucked in, and so all of a sudden, something jumps out from behind a rock, or there's some big loud crash or something like that. Just like, that was awesome. Did you guys see that? Did he just do it again? This is not planned. You guys better pay attention. The Lord's working here today. Holy smokes. All right, but they introduced these startle effects. All right, focus. Just to get your kids' attention again, because they just go blank, right? They go dead behind the eyes. They shut the rest of the world out, and so these TV shows have to scare your kids or wake your kids back up so they can get their attention going again. It's ridiculous. Over time, like any hypnotic drug, kids become desensitized, and so the attention-grabbing startle effects had to get bigger and bigger. So they just get worse and worse, bigger and bigger as it goes on. This is sad. Now let's look at the content. Let's look at the content when it comes to these things. Because here's what we have to understand. There is a current in the constant stream of media. And what it does is it washes the value of the home downriver to ultimately be careened over the water's edge and dashed on the rocks below. So let's not kid ourselves to be so naive to think that the constant stream fed to our kids by this world has no effect on them. There is an agenda behind every TV show and movie out there. Okay, now it may just be to make money, but a lot of times it may be political, and oftentimes it's maybe even more sinister than that. And we'll take a look at some of those examples. And I'm not saying having an agenda itself is bad, because you probably have an agenda for your family, right? The conversations that you have, the things that you do, you have an agenda for your family. You want to lead your family in a certain direction. We want to raise a certain type of child, right? You want to pass on your family values, and so that's your agenda for your family, and so you do things to make sure those get communicated, those get carried on. We have an agenda at this church, right? Within our children's ministry and our student ministries. We want to see people saved. We want to make disciples. We want to teach the Bible. We want to strengthen families. We saw that last week from Pastor Troy. We have an agenda to conform people into the image of Christ, right? So having an agenda itself is not bad. However, most media today has an agenda that is directly opposed to our agenda as a church and our agenda as families. And that should come as no surprise. Because it's coming from the world, we realize that it will automatically be against what God is doing. James 4:4. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. So listen, parents, we have to realize if it's coming from the world, it is an enemy of God. And if you want to raise your kids in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, most media will be against you doing that. Okay? And so this next section we're going to look at, we're going to use John 10:10 as a kind of an outline for us. John 10:10, you're probably familiar with this. The thief cometh not, but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I come that they might have life and they might have it more abundantly, right? So there's a thief out there. We can realize that this thief is our enemy, reference to Satan. A thief is someone who makes their way into places they are not permitted to take something that is not theirs. And we have all allowed, I shouldn't say all, but most of us have allowed a thief into our own homes. And so let's use these 3 points here. Steal, to kill, and to destroy as our outline in this next section. Okay? Today's media has an agenda to sexualize our children. They want to sexualize our children, steal their innocence. They want to steal their innocence. And there's a lot of ways that happens, but I want to take a look at the agenda that is obviously what I think is obviously being pushed in all types of media, but even in media directed at our kids, and that's the LGBTQ agenda. Now, this leads us into a sensitive discussion, but we can't talk about the agenda behind today's kids shows and not talk about the LGBTQ community. And it's sensitive because first it can come across as us hating members of that community, which is not true. We in fact love them and desire to see them reconciled to God in a right relationship with Him. However, their lifestyle is opposed to that. It does not allow for that. Another reason this is a sensitive subject is because there may be some of you in here today that have classmates or friends or loved ones, or maybe you yourself are struggling with your sexual identity. And I want you to know that what we're about to talk about is not a direct attack on you or your friends or your loved ones. We want to help you. We truly do. We believe that God has laid out a very clear design for how that works. And we can show you that in Scripture. That's not our goal for today. Certainly we can talk about that if that's something that you have questions about or are struggling with. And so we want you to know that this isn't an attack on you. We do love you. We want to see everyone in a right relationship with God. But the fact of the matter is, most young people that struggle with it today, it's because of the influence that media has in their life. So I would even go as far to say that I believe that media, and especially social media, which Josh talked about, and he addressed some of that the last couple of weeks. But media is at the root of what is called rapid onset gender dysphoria. If you're not familiar, that's the idea that at younger ages than ever, and seemingly with no prior symptoms, so it's kind of out of nowhere, kids are now questioning and confused between the gender they were born with and how they identify, or what they feel like they should be. So boys who feel like they should be girls, and girls who feel like they should be boys. And that's not even getting into all the other categories that our culture tries to define as gender these days. This agenda is both implicitly normalized and explicitly force-fed to our children through TV and the movies that they watch. Look at this tweet from Insider. From 2017 to 2019, we found a 222% increase in representations of LGBTQ identity. In 2019, a total of 74 newly debuted or confirmed LGBTQ characters made their way to the screen. Okay, so just recently we've seen this giant jump of these characters, and it comes from a direct push on the part of Hollywood, and we'll see that, right? So how did we get here? Well, we've got to this point because there is an agenda being pushed by the creators, writers, and directors of children's television to make it happen. In one article by Breitbart, the increase of LGBTQ characters and themes popping up in TV shows made for children in the last decade is not an organic development. It's the consequence of so-called queer creators pushing the LGBTQ agenda and working with major entertainment networks, writers, producers, showrunners, and directors to place sexualized themes into on-screen fare made for young audiences. And this is from Insider also, which, if you're not familiar with Insider, it's a publication. They're advocating for this. They say, the rise of gender diverse representation is no coincidence. Shows created and run by queer women, trans, and non-binary showrunners are largely responsible for the influx of non-binary and trans characters in kids' animation. Right? They would say it's in the name of representation. But I can almost promise you that it's not about representing the minute number of kids that actually struggle with this issue that these shows are aimed at. It's more about seeing themselves, the adults, the writers, the directors, the creators, represented in these kids' shows to justify their lifestyle. And that's what you'll hear over and over and over again from these creators, is they'll say, now some kid doesn't have to feel like how I feel. So they're making sure that they themselves are represented in these shows and in this agenda. They're not trying to, while they say that they're trying to do it for these kids that struggle with it, the amount of kids that actually struggle with it are very, very small, very small. And there's kids that think they struggle with it, and a lot of times it's a confusing phase that everyone goes through. It's just the influence of media now, the availability of social media that fuels that flame for these kids. But so they claim it's in the name of representation when really they're only concerned about themselves being represented and justified. And so just to be honest, I hate this. I hate it. I hate what they're doing to our kids. I hate how they're doing it. I hate what has happened to these adults, that they feel like they need to justify their sinful lifestyle and try to seduce our kids into it as well. I hate it. There's this whole community and culture that feels the need to force our kids to be confronted with these very mature topics and to force them to choose if they're a lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender, or at the very least get them to question it, which is what the Q stands for in LGBTQ. It can stand for queer, which is a broad descriptor, or for questioning. It's just for people that aren't even sure, right? And here's the thing, again, what we've seen with our kids is they're at a very impressionable age. So it doesn't take much for them to begin to question what it is they're confronted with. And when they're confronted with these sexual issues of who you're attracted to and how you identify, what your sexual identity is, all those things, it doesn't take a lot for them to question and to be confused. They sexualize our kids, and when they do it, it steals their innocence. So let me just give you a few examples. And again, these are just a few. But there's an article from Pride.com. You have that headline up there. Pride.com, which lists 16 cartoons with awesome LGBTQ characters. Okay, now it's from Pride.com. Okay, so they're advocating for this. So you can imagine if these are their top recommendations to check out LGBTQ characters, these would be my top recommendations of what to avoid in your home. Okay. But just a few that I'll list. Some of the top ones. The very top one, which pops up over and over, is called Steven Universe. I believe it's on Cartoon Network. They say that it may be the queerest kids show on TV. So here you can see a bunch of them listed up there. Adventure Time features a lesbian relationship. Gravity Falls, same, homosexual relationship. Star versus the Forces of Evil. It says that they just talk about these gay characters like they're no big deal, very nonchalant. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, which is on Netflix, is full of these types of characters. So that top left one there is Gravity Falls. So those two policemen are in a relationship. The one below that is, I believe, Star versus the Forces of Evil. This one is from Adventure Time. That one's from the top right is She-Ra. And then the bottom one down here is Steven Universe. These shows might be directed at an older audience of kids, but there's plenty aimed at young kids as well. So take a look at this next list. Shows like DuckTales, Bubble Guppies, Arthur, which is PBS, Doc McStuffins, Tots or something. I think it's called Tots, and My Little Pony. So all these kids' TV shows. So that on Arthur, their teacher gets married to a guy. DuckTales have two dads, a drag queen on Bubble Guppies, two moms in that Tots show, two moms in Doc McStuffins, a lesbian couple on My Little Pony, and truly the list goes on and on and on. Sesame Street has introduced gay relationships, and there's just all kinds of shows, again, educational shows even, directed at our kids that pushes this agenda. Some of the examples are very implicit. So in other words, their sexual identity is implied, like they don't come out and say that, these moms are in a relationship. They just live together and have kids together, right? So it's kind of implicit. You might, I don't have a picture for this, I meant to pull one together, but Toy Story 4, there's two moms in the background of kindergarten scene dropping off their kid. They don't point it out, it's no big deal, and what that does, it begins to normalize this, which is very dangerous. For our kids, they just begin to think that's how it works, and that's okay. The same with Pixar's Onward. There's just all it takes. There's one word in there where one of the police officers references her girlfriend, and again, like it's no big deal. They're not even, the other person's not even, or I guess it's a monster. If you ever watched it, it's not a person, but truly, it's a fantasy. I'm not saying that as an attack on anybody. She's a Cyclops. So, right, but she references her girlfriend. So there's a lot that it's implicit. It's very sneaky. It's very deceitful. It's normalized for our kids. They see it, and even if they don't take direct notice, subconsciously there's going to be some noticing going on, and it's no big deal. All right, so parents, you have to be aware of what your kids are watching. Some of these instances are so subtle that if you're not paying close attention, if you're sitting there on your phone while your kids are watching TV, you might just miss them. Some are very explicit. They're very in your face. So this past June for Pride Month, Blue's Clues featured an animated drag queen singing in a gay parade listing every kind of sexual orientation. Nickelodeon also aired it was like a commercial or a special. It was very short. But the same drag queen singing about all the colors of a pride flag. So those are both on Nickelodeon. So again, parents, you have to know what your kids are watching. The influence of TV, movies, and media have in our kids' lives is really, it's just insane. It's incredible. So you must monitor what they watch and limit what they watch. So again, setting them loose on a kid profile on Disney Plus is not, just because it's a kid profile doesn't mean that they're going to be protected from this agenda. Okay? This agenda is seemingly inescapable. So just personal story. We were trying to enjoy the Olympics with my family, and again, we don't have cable, so we were streaming it. And if you guys do that often enough, sometimes depending on which platform or which show, they just show the same commercial over and over and over again during the commercial break. There was one for, and again, a lot of it was over the kids' heads, but for HIV medication, and so it's going through and. Kids, they don't even know what's going on, but I can kind of see what's happening, and I'm like, okay, so far there's nothing, obvious. But then at the very end of the commercial, two guys kiss, and so we're all just kind of sitting there quiet, and then Owen goes, "Ew." Now, he does that every time Katie and I kiss too, so I don't. But he's aware. But we were just trying to watch the Olympics, for Pete's sake, with my family. It's like, well, we can't watch this anymore. Because whenever the kids would go to bed and Katie and I would watch the Olympics, same commercial keeps popping up over and over. So, first part of their agenda is to sexualize our kids. Sorry, I got to move a little quicker here. And then letter B is to sexualize our children, and then B is to desensitize our children. They seek to kill their conscience. Right, they get exposed to these topics over and over and over again to where it just becomes nothing to them, right? It has no impact on them, or they begin to seek it out even more. So, for example, in the area of violence, right? So you see it enough, kids become deadened to it. As they grow and mature, that might be something that they seek out even more, and it gets even more and more violent and repulsive. Indiana University research study concludes that violence doesn't add anything to a kid's enjoyment of their programs or the characters. Okay? So kids, either way, they're going to enjoy it either way. But yet, they also found that it's in 70% of children's television shows that has violent content. Right? So it doesn't add anything to the show, but yet they're still force-feeding it to our kids, 70% of kids' television. Again, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, extensive research evidence indicates that media violence can contribute to aggression behavior, desensitization to violence, nightmares, and fear of being harmed. And then again, according to the AAP website, children between the ages of 2 and 18 spend an average of 3 hours each day watching television. A 3-year national television study reported that the AAP found that children's shows had the most violence of all television programming. Statistics read that some cartoons average 20 acts of violence in 1 hour, and that by the age of 18, children will have seen 16,000 simulated murders and 200,000 acts of violence on television. Young people are especially in jeopardy of the negative effects of television violence because many young children cannot discriminate between what they see and what is real. They become desensitized to violence. They become desensitized to sex. We talked about this in the previous section some, so we won't spend any more time on it. But the younger these kids are exposed to sexual content, the more it confuses them, the more it shapes their view of it, and it leads them to desire for more. And then the other one I wanted to add in here was witchcraft. The Bible has a lot to say about witchcraft, and we think, we usually think nothing of it. But kids shows today have a noticeable amount of witchcraft in them, and not the bibbidi-bobbidi-boo kind, okay? And truly, I'm not against certain, I enjoy Harry Potter and, fantasy movies and all that, but that's not for kids, okay? We're talking about shows for kids. And I mean legit spell books, incantations, calling on ancestral spirits type of witchcraft. Some examples include The Owl House, which is a newer series on Disney Plus, with a young teen that goes through the training to become a witch. Also, she's bisexual, so just a bonus there. This is a tweet from the show's creator. She says, "Anyway, be gay and do witchcraft." Okay, so this is I think it's a lady that's creating content for your kids to watch on Disney Plus on their kids' profile. Okay. Elena of Avalor, one character is trained to become a royal wizard with spells and incantations, calling on spiritual assistance. Sophia the First has spells, spell books, shape-shifting wizards. And I only point these ones out mainly because I saw the effect they had in my own kids' lives. So one day, we were watching some Sophia the First, and next thing I know, the kids are playing. They're like, "Oh, let's get out our spell books." And I was like, "Whoa, hold on. The only book in this house is the Bible, kids, so no spell books here," okay? Again, it just desensitizes them to the topic, and again, we're not talking about what the Lord says about witchcraft, although you can do that study in Scripture and see everything that it's connected to. And then they want to criticize God's design, okay? They want to sexualize our children, they want to desensitize our children, they want to criticize God's design, they want to destroy God's picture. You'll be hard-pressed to find a family that resembles the biblical structure of the home in any of today's TV shows. At the risk of being redundant, we have an enemy. He is trying to steal, kill, and destroy what God has set up. He's seeking to devour anyone that tries to live according to Scripture. There is a very real attack on our homes, our families, and our kids, and the weapon that Satan is using to destroy God's picture is media and technology. He is a thief that seeks to destroy God's picture for the home through the following areas. The first one is family. Again, it's hard to find a healthy family on TV. Most families in media are dysfunctional. God has structured the family to function a certain way, with the kids obeying their parents, wives respecting and submitting to their husbands, husbands loving and leading their families. Most kids are disrespectful and disobedient to their parents and usually run off on some adventure, right, against their parents' will. But in the end, it all works out and their parents realize that they were wrong all along. What kind of message is that teaching our kids? If that happened in reality, right? Kids run off on some adventure, they steal a car, they end up in prison or a ditch. Media today sends a message to kids that you can live your own life and don't have to listen to your parents because you know better and your parents just don't understand. When it comes to parental roles, most dads are bumbling idiots with no real leadership in their homes. Moms are critical of their husbands and are typically portrayed as the head of the house, or in the case of most Disney movies, are dead. So I'm not sure. There's a lot of dead moms in Disney movies. Someone's got some issues. The gender roles are usually reversed in the home. Just to throw out one of my recommendations, and again, it comes with all kinds of caveats, but we love Bluey on Disney Plus. I hope to be as good a dad as Bandit someday. Now, this comes with some, qualifiers. Episodes are only 7 minutes long, which again does not help with our kids' attention span. But typically they're very creative, very loving family that involved in the kids' lives. So anyways, just want to throw that out there. I'm a big fan of Bluey. I like watching it myself. The other area is divorce. Divorce is common. Marriage is optional in most TV shows today. But we understand that God hates divorce. And marriage is a beautiful picture of our relationship with Him, yet it's rarely portrayed that way in television today. So in conclusion, this influential group of TV creators, producers, directors, bigwigs, whatever, they're obsessed with forcing their agenda on our kids and forcing them to wrestle with these very mature topics. when our kids are most impressionable, most vulnerable, and they become the most confused. And that's the very result they're hoping for, to confuse kids about the way that God created them and designed their home to function so that they can question God's purpose for men and women in the family for the rest of their lives. Because here's what the enemy knows. Young kids accept information at face value. Case in point, let me just look around the room real quick. Anybody in here in 5th grade or under? Okay, good. Case in point, plug your ears. Santa Claus. Right? Santa Claus. They take information at face value. They don't think about it. They don't question it. And so when they're constantly being bombarded with these messages from the world, they take it at face value. And listen, that's something we understand in our children's ministry. That's something that we've come across. Their spiritual formation begins as early as 2 years old, right? And so we take that serious in our children's ministry. Statistics show that what a child believes at the age of 13 is what they will most likely believe when they're an adult, okay? So what we're teaching our kids now, what they're confronted with now, is shaping the type of adults that they'll become, right? So what are you teaching your kids in your home? Or what are you allowing the world to teach your kids in your home, right? The world knows that. And we know that kids are gullible and innocent. And the enemy is just trying to beat us to the punch. All right, this just goes back a couple weeks when we saw our roles as parents to guard and to guide our kids. We talked about that when it comes to the way it shapes our kids in Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. We saw that included a factor of guiding, and so we should be teaching our kids, showing them the right direction to head, the way to live a godly life, but we also need to guard them from the world's influence, and that includes the television and movies that they watch. Our best defense against the thief trying to steal and to kill and destroy our families is to teach our kids God's purpose while they're young. They're bombarded with anti-God messages from the world constantly, and so we need to be just as diligent to teach them God's design. We see this in Deuteronomy 6:4-9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. Parents, that's talking to you. First of all, it needs to be in your heart. Amen. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, dinner time, when thou walkest by the way, on your way to school, when thou liest down, bedtime, when thou risest up in the morning. Thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand. They shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. Thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. Right? Our kids are constantly flooded with these messages from the world. And those messages are against God. They are in opposition to the agenda that the Lord has for us, for our kids, for our families. And so to be able to combat that, you have to be just as diligent to teach your kids that there is one God, and you are to love Him with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. You don't need to compromise their innocence to protect them from the enemy's attacks. We just need to teach them how God designed it, right? So one of my struggles, at least personally, and so maybe some of you have done it before, I struggle on how much to tell my kids when it comes to this, knowing, what they'll be attacked with, especially as young as my kids are. And so, I don't want to teach them about homosexual relationships yet, right? I don't want to explain all that. But the truth of the matter is, we can teach our kids and prepare them to be able to resist that without explaining all that to them. And case in point is just teach them what God says. So, again, another personal story. When Emma was in kindergarten, she's in 3rd grade now, our firstborn going off to school, we're thinking, oh man, I hope, everything we taught her stuck, and, that she's, she's a good girl and all those things. And we're praying for her protection, not just physically, but from the evil influence of this world and all that. And one day Emma comes home from kindergarten and says, so-and-so's mom said boys can marry boys and girls can marry girls. And I'm like, oh crap. It's like, I did not think we would get here this quickly, right? So I did my best to compose myself, right? Don't overreact in some of those things. I said, well, what did you say? She said, well, I think that's against the rules. And I said, okay, good. I said, well, whose rules? She was like, God's rules. And I said, all right, cool. That's right. And so then it allowed me to lead into a conversation with her. But the truth is, we never taught her that, same-sex marriage is wrong or bad or any of that. We simply taught her, hey, this is the way that God intended it to be. And because she's young and impressionable, she accepted it at face value, right? And so that's what she believes at a young age. And so whenever the world tries to pervert what God teaches us, it hits our kids wrong, right? They're like, wait a second, that's not right, because God designed it this way, right? They're not necessarily processing everything that means. That's the way that God created kids, right? Is to teach them. And the standard for faith in Scripture is that of a child, right? They believe it because mom and dad said so, because God said so, because the Bible said so, whatever. And so, listen, you guys have to be diligent to teach your kids. You don't have to compromise their innocence. You don't have to explain all those different aspects of what that means. Just teach them what God says, the way He designed it. And when they're confronted with that, I believe that God will take care of that and protect them, and they'll be reminded of the way that it should be. Okay, so if we're diligent to teach our kids what's right, then when they're confronted with the perverted version, they'll know something's not right. Right? So that's Satan tries to take everything that God does and pervert it and twist it, right? Make it the opposite. He does that with God's word. He does that with relationships. He does that with sex. He does that with families, whatever it is. He's going to take God's design for it and twist it. So just teach them what God designed. Teach them what God says. Okay? Again, let me just remind you to get on that Facebook page. Some of this information I want to share with you. So this Insider, actually, they created a database of all the kids shows that have LGBTQ characters. And so if you're looking for maybe some stuff to avoid, Insider has done it for you. Okay, so I'll be sharing links to that on the Facebook group and some other things. And so make sure you join that if you haven't joined that yet. All right, let me pray and we'll be done. Lord, we come to you, and I do just want to lift up these parents, these kids, their families, Lord, and just ask that you would guide us, that we would be faithful to teach the next generation, whether it's in our own home or in our church, what your word says, and that will prepare them for the attack of the enemy. It'll prepare them for the thief when he comes to take what's not his, that they'll know what they believe, why they believe it, and that you would protect them from the evil influence that is always trying to impact our kids, Lord. So help us as parents to do that, but we also ask for your grace in our kids' lives to do it, even when we're not aware or when we're failing at it. Lord, just take care of our kids for us. We just pray these things in your name. Amen. All right. Thanks, everybody.